Hello and welcome to the series of onboarding and config guides for Cisco's Catalyst SD-WAN Manager for Industrial IoT routers. This is part 3 in the series. In parts 1 and 2, we covered an overview of SD-WAN, and part 2, we covered how to onboard an industrial router in SD-WAN with the overlay fabric and in the typical SD-WAN mode. In this part, we will be covering mode 2, which is the SD routing mode. And specifically, we will be looking at how to onboard an industrial router for IoT and some of the config options on the UI and some of the monitoring that we can see from the UI as well. My name is Nipun. I'm a technical marketing engineer, and let's get right into it. So we will start with some of the prerequisites needed. And in part 2 of the series, we went over how to add a device to the PNP Smart account and sync or upload an inventory file to the SD-WAN manager. We won't be going through that again in this series because the process is the same. So what we will focus on is how to configure a template for SD routing mode and attach IR devices, and how to check some of the elements for status and monitoring in the SD-WAN manager. This is the router we will be onboarding as before. And just a little bit of an overview again, we have two modes, the fabric or the traditional SD-WAN mode where we have the control plane, management plane, and the data plane segregated or distributed. And in the SD routing mode, we have the routers or the industrial WAN edges connected directly to an SD-WAN manager UI or the SD-WAN manager software directly through a single link. And the routing control and data plane lies with the edge itself. So it's more about device management in SD routing as compared to SD-WAN. And we have the transport side for communication over the WAN to the SD-WAN manager and the network. We have the service side where you will attach your IoT sensors and devices and controllers that need to communicate over the network to either to the SD-WAN manager or to the data center located at the hub. And we can segregate traffic or isolate traffic in VPNs. The SD-WAN manager will manage the industrial router edge configuration over a netconf connection, so it directly manages the router configuration and onboarding. And just as a reminder, there is no overlay in this mode, so there is no overlay management protocol or there is no segregation of control and data components. This is a purely device management focused mode for onboarding autonomous industrial routers into the SD-WAN manager that for customers that prefer this mode of management. Okay, the ZTP steps are a little bit different from the standard SD-WAN mode. Since we do not have a controller, the WAN edge, once it's redirected to the validator, it will receive the IP address of the SD-WAN manager. And in step 2, the SD-WAN manager will push down a configuration to connect the device to the network through a negotiated DTLS tunnel. And this configuration is what we will go over. That will basically configure the WAN edge. It will also configure other services if needed, the LAN interface or any security config or any service side VPN VRF config that may be required to enable communication over the network. We will take an industrial router, the I-1835, and as before, we are using the same mode. We are using a cellular SIM and using one of the providers and then onboarding a device primarily through that SIM. And we've logged into the SD-WAN manager, and let's go ahead to add the device. So adding the device, we go into configuration, devices, and you can either sync your smart account to update the device list, or you can upload a vantage list. So in the last series, we uploaded through a serial file or inventory file, and we can do that the same way for this as well. So we can upload and then choose a file, and you can choose the serial.viptera file. And once you do that, you send to controllers and then you hit upload. So we've already done that. And once we've done that, let's go in now. Let's prepare the configuration group to onboard the device. Let's go into config groups. Let's add a configuration group. Let's create an SD routing config. Create the group. Let's associate our devices that we just added and hit save. So let's go back. Let's provision the devices. We have an additional step. Let's go back to the configuration group. And this is required for SD routing mode. We need to add a CLI profile for the CLI extension template. So let's choose one, or let's create a new one. And let's add the config here. So I'll take you through the config that's needed. So we want to add the SD routing enablement. We want to make sure that the WAN interface we select is cellular 010 and is vManage true. We also want to configure the cellular interface through the CLI template. And let's hit save. And now let's provision the device. Let's click on the device site ID. Let's click deploy. Let's select this. Make sure the system IP, hostname, and site ID are what you want. Specify the admin password. Click next. You can also preview the CLI for SD-WAN and SD routing. And since all of this configuration is new, you would see the configuration being added here. Let's click on deploy now. So that's all that's needed. Now we can check deployment status. So it's going to go into scheduled because the device is still coming up. And once the device is up, we'll look at some of the options and how to look at some of the troubleshooting and monitoring options that we can see through SD-WAN. Okay, so the our router, industry router is coming up, and if you notice, it's come up in autonomous mode. In the previous series, we saw that it came up in controller mode. So this is the difference between these modes. The controller mode works with SD-WAN controllers. The autonomous mode works without the controllers, talking directly to the SD-WAN manager through a DTLS link. And we are waiting for the router to connect over the PNP server. The PNP server is going to redirect the router to the vBond or the validator, which is then going to provide the IP address of the SD-WAN manager. So let's give it a couple of minutes to do that. Okay, so as you can see, the PNP discovery has started on cellular, and we have contacted the PNP server and connected and received a response. So the SD routing initial config has been pushed down. We've also received the vBond details, and vBond has pushed the vManage or SD-WAN manager IP to us. And now we are in the process of connecting to SD-WAN. Okay, and now you can see that vManage has connected. You can see we are connected to the SD-WAN manager. All of the services for SD routing mode are up and active. We are also receiving the configuration from SD-WAN manager, and we should be up and running soon. So you can see that the host name has changed and system IP has been received. All of the configuration has been pushed down from the SD-WAN manager. You can check connectivity using show SD routing, connections, and summary. And you can see that we have a single connection DTLS or our system IP using cellular 010 to a public IP, which is the SD-WAN manager GUI or the software. All right, now let's go into the UI and look at the router. If you go into monitor, devices, you can click on the router. You can see the controls connection to SD-WAN manager is showing here. You can check system status, CPU memory usage, sensors, any crashes or any hardware events related to this. You can check the events related to the platform, coming from the platform, about anything that you are interested in, and it classifies them by severity. You can go for troubleshooting. You can ping trace route to the device. We just showed you the control connections. Another interesting thing you can do is you can even capture packets from the device. You can look at real-time information of the device. And for example, you can look at control connections. And this directly accesses the device and gets you the information. You can also look at, for example, interface statistics. And show you can see which interfaces are alive and sending traffic through. The other thing you can also do is add SSH to the device. So click on Tools, SSH Terminal, and click on the router. And you have SSH access through the GUI into the router. Through this, you can look at the router and keep in mind that the router is managed by the SD-WAN manager. So any changes you make on this will be overwritten by the SD-WAN manager. So just keep this is the recommended operations here are to run show commands for debugging and troubleshooting, and not really configuration. So there we have a router connected in SD routing mode, managed through the SD-WAN manager. And that's it for our series on onboarding a router into the SD-WAN manager. Thank you.